Every empire treats its currency like a law of nature. Every government speaks as if its promises are engineered to outlast time. And every generation learns the same lesson the hard way. Money is only stable until it isn't. From ancient coinage to modern bank accounts, collapse has never been the exception. Collapse is the recurring feature. The real danger is not inflation or panic or recession by themselves. The real danger is the assumption that the system you're inside cannot break. We look at numbers on screens and think we're looking at wealth. But money is not a substance. It is an agreement. It is confidence shared by strangers. And confidence can disappear faster than any army can march. That is why financial history is so brutal. It doesn't care about your expectations. It doesn't care about your loyalty. It rewards preparation and punishes faith. And if you study enough collapses, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. The people who survived were rarely the ones who trusted the system most. They were the ones who understood its fragility first. Take Byzantium, the Eastern Empire that inherited Rome's legacy and outlived the Western half by centuries. For much of its history, Byzantium possessed something that looked like financial immortality: the gold solidus. For generations, it was accepted across the Mediterranean and beyond. Merchants trusted it. States respected it. It functioned like a medieval reserve currency because it reliably held its gold content. If you held a solidus, you held something the world recognized. But stability becomes a temptation. You would assume Byzantium learned from Rome's earlier experience with the silver denarius, when emperors destroyed the currency by reducing its silver content until it became a token with a thin wash of legitimacy. Rome's debasement didn't simply weaken money, it shattered trust. And yet centuries later, Byzantium repeated the pattern in gold. The solidus slowly lost purity. The changes were incremental, almost invisible. At first, the market didn't react. Merchants continued to accept the coin. The empire continued to function. Then the cracks spread. Once people suspected the gold wasn't real gold anymore, the solidus stopped being a universal anchor and became just another political claim stamped into metal. The credibility that took centuries to build unraveled quickly. Trade became harder. Prices became unstable. Confidence fractured. And the people who suffered were not the ones making the decisions. They were the ones holding the currency when the illusion failed. What survived? Not imperial promises, not official decrees. What survived was what the state could not dilute. Real gold held outside the system, land beyond easy confiscation, goods that remained valuable even when coins lost meaning. The first lesson is as old as empire itself. Governments eventually face incentives that push them toward weakening their money. When they do, real value migrates to whatever cannot be manufactured with authority. But collapse doesn't always begin with rulers trimming coins. Sometimes it begins with shock. In the mid-14th century, Europe was struck by the Black Death. The scale of the devastation is difficult to comprehend. Entire cities emptied. Villages vanished. Trade routes fell quiet. The economy did not simply shrink, it broke. And yet here is what makes the Black Death such an important case study. The collapse was catastrophic, but it also reshuffled bargaining power. When half the labor force disappears, labor becomes scarce. Survivors could demand higher wages. Land that once seemed precious became abundant relative to people. Houses sat empty. Fields lay unused. And those who had liquidity, silver, tools, movable goods, the ability to organize labor, could acquire assets at a discount that would have been unthinkable a generation earlier. The plague destroyed wealth for many, but it created openings for those positioned to buy when others were forced to sell. If that sounds familiar, it should. Modern crises follow the same logic, even when the surface looks different. In any shock, pandemic, war, financial crash, those with reserves gain options, and those without them lose choices. The lesson is not moral, it is structural. Crises reward liquidity. They punish dependence. When systems seize up, the people with flexibility don't just survive, they expand. And sometimes the collapse doesn't begin in government at all. It begins in institutions that appear untouchable. Renaissance Florence was a financial capital long before modern capitalism had a name. Its banks financed monarchs, merchants, and entire trade networks. Families like the Bardi and Peruzzi operated with prestige that felt permanent. They were not small lenders in alleyways. They were pillars of Europe's credit. Then they met a familiar enemy, sovereign default. Florentine banks had lent enormous sums to Edward III of England. When the English crown stopped paying during wars with France, the consequences were immediate. The banks collapsed. Depositors were ruined. Trade froze. A city that looked like a financial miracle discovered the oldest truth in banking. Size does not equal safety. Reputation does not equal protection. An institution can appear solid right up until the moment it fails. And what survives when institutions fail? Not the brand, not the legacy, not the public confidence that once surrounded them. What survives is what is not trapped inside them. Diversification, tangible assets, decentralized control of wealth. In every era, too big to fail has been less a guarantee than a story told until the moment it stops working. Now take a collapse closer to home, one most people don't realize contains a monetary disaster, the American Civil War. The war was fought with rifles and cannons, but it was sustained by finance. The Union issued paper currency, greenbacks, not backed by gold, but by the government's promise. At first it worked. The economy continued. The war continued. But the more paper entered circulation, the less each unit was worth. Inflation ate purchasing power. Trust wavered. In the Confederacy, the situation was far worse. The South printed money aggressively and without credibility. Supply lines broke. Goods became scarce. Prices exploded. Salaries lost meaning faster than soldiers could spend them. By the end of the war, Confederate currency wasn't merely weak, it was dead. People carried stacks of bills that could not buy bread. Lifelong savings evaporated. What survived in the South? Not paper, not patriotism, not state promises. Hard goods survived, food survived, land survived, gold survived, and those who controlled real assets, whether through planning or opportunism, could buy property at fire sale prices from people forced to liquidate to stay alive. The lesson is uncomfortable, but it repeats across centuries. When currency collapses, wealth transfers to those holding what the collapsing system cannot print. France offers another variation, collapse not from war alone, but from revolutionary optimism colliding with monetary reality. In the 1790s, revolutionary France issued the assignats, paper currency supposedly backed by confiscated church land. In theory, it was rational. In practice, it became addictive. The government printed more to cover deficits, each new batch diluting the last. Prices surged, wages lagged. Farmers began refusing paper. They wanted goods, silver, anything they could trust. When trust breaks, money dies quickly. The assignat became nearly worthless. The economy reverted to barter and hard currency wherever possible. The revolution, which had promised liberation, produced a monetary nightmare that hit ordinary citizens hardest. Again, the survivors were not the ones who believed the rhetoric most strongly. They were the ones who held food, property, and materials. In collapse, noble intentions do not matter. Acceptance does. Money only works when people want it. Fast forward to the late 20th century, and you see a different type of collapse that rhymes with the old ones, only faster and more global. The Asian financial crisis of 1997. Thailand had borrowed heavily in dollars, while maintaining a fragile currency peg. When confidence broke and the peg collapsed, the debt didn't disappear. It became unpayable overnight. Local currencies fell in waves across Southeast Asia. Companies failed. Unemployment surged. Governments begged for rescue. But here's what matters. The burden fell on ordinary citizens. Savings lost value. Mortgages became crushing as foreign-denominated obligations expanded in local terms. Jobs vanished. Meanwhile, global capital, funds that could flee instantly, often survived, and in some cases profited, buying assets cheaply after the collapse. The lesson is consistent across history. Debt in someone else's money is a trap. When the storm hits, the creditor does not drown, the debtor does. And by now, the pattern should be unmistakable. Whether the collapse comes from debasement, pandemic shock, bank failure, war printing, revolutionary overissuance, or foreign currency debt, the themes repeat. Currencies can die. Institutions can fail. Trust can evaporate. Those who survive are rarely the ones who assume stability. They are the ones who treat stability as temporary. The most disturbing part is that collapse is not ancient history. It is happening now. Lebanon between 2019 and 2021 provides one of the clearest modern examples. Citizens woke up to find the banking system effectively closed. Deposits were frozen. Withdrawals were limited. The Lebanese pound collapsed, losing the vast majority of its value. A lifetime of savings became nothing. Middle-class professionals found themselves ruined. People lined up outside banks pleading for access to their own money, learning a truth that most people in stable countries prefer not to think about. Money in the bank is not a vault. It is a liability of an institution. And in a crisis, that institution can refuse to pay. Who survived better? Those with assets outside the country. Those who held gold, property, or stable foreign currency. Those who got out early. Everyone else was trapped inside the machinery as it locked. If this feels distant, it shouldn't. In 2008, Americans watched homes vanish and retirements shrink, while the institutions that caused the collapse were rescued. In 2020, governments printed at historic scale, propping up markets and inflating asset values while wages lagged. And in recent years, regional bank failures have reminded everyone that confidence can flip quickly, even in wealthy nations. Stability is real until it becomes psychological. Once people doubt the system becomes fragile. So what actually protects wealth? History suggests there is no single universal shield, but there are recurring categories of protection. In Byzantium, it was holding real gold rather than diluted coin. After the Black Death, it was liquidity to buy assets when others could not. In Florence, it was not trusting institutions to guarantee safety. In the Confederacy, it was hard goods when paper died. In France, it was food and property when currency lost acceptance. In Asia, it was avoiding debt in foreign currency. In Lebanon, it was diversification beyond the reach of local controls. The pattern changes, but the principle stays constant. When the illusion breaks, protection comes from what cannot be inflated, frozen, or decreed away. And there is another layer most people miss. Wealth is not only what you hold, it is also what you can do. In every collapse, money becomes confusing, but needs become clearer. People still need food, repair, transportation, medicine, shelter. The individuals and communities who can produce value in real terms, who can build, fix, grow, trade, often rise fastest after the dust settles. That is why collapse is both tragedy and transfer. For the unprepared, it is ruin. For those with resilience, liquidity, and practical value, it becomes a window. This is the part that makes history so cold. Collapse does not distribute suffering evenly. It concentrates it, and then it redistributes opportunity upward and outward, toward those who planned, those who diversified, and those who understood that paper systems are temporary. So the question is not whether money fails, It always has. It always will. The question is whether you will be among the many left holding promises, or among the few holding something real when the promises stop being believed. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. History has the answers. I'll show you where to look.